Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a problem that pretty much every retailer feels but almost always gets wrong. We're talking about the hidden symptoms of bad demand forecasting. Does this sound familiar? I bet it does. It's something you hear all the time. Planners work for months and months, and still, the stuff that ends up on the floor just feels wrong.
And then there's this one. The supply chain folks are feeling the heat because inventory is piling up in one store, while another one is completely sold out of the exact same item. Meanwhile, the marketing and pricing teams, they are just pulling their hair out. They launch this huge campaign and crickets. The sales lift they were expecting just never shows up. And finally, there's this feeling of just always being a step behind, right? It feels like your teams are constantly putting out fires, just reacting to yesterday's sales numbers, instead of getting ahead of what's coming tomorrow. So here's the kicker. These aren't four different problems. Not at all. They're all just symptoms. Different masks for the exact same root cause. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play detective. We'll start with a problem everyone recognizes. Then we'll examine each symptom one by one. The guesswork, the chasing demand, the flat promotions. After that, we'll uncover the single root cause and wrap up with a much bigger, more important question that every retailer really ought to be asking themselves. All right, first things first. Things like assortment planning, allocation, promotions, they don't live on separate islands. They are all deeply, deeply connected, and they all hinge on one single thing: knowing what your customer actually wants to buy. This right here, this is the billion-dollar question. Literally every decision a retailer makes, from buying to pricing, is just an attempt to answer this. And when your answer is off, well, the whole system just starts to crumble. So when you get that fundamental question wrong, you get your first major symptom. It pops up right at the beginning of the season in merchandise planning, and it feels less like planning and more like, well, just a shot in the dark. And this is such a classic disconnect. On the surface, what you see are missed targets or assortments that just don't fit the local store. But what's really going on behind the curtain is that your teams are working with broken, incomplete data, and because they can't trust the numbers, they're forced to rely on gut feel instead of solid demand models. And the fallout from that? Planners start overriding the system because they trust their gut more. Then the whole problem gets mislabeled as a purchasing issue, but it's not. The key here is that the problem isn't the people or their tools, it's the fact that they don't have a reliable, detailed forecast to guide them from the very start. Now, that initial guesswork quickly snowballs into our second symptom, chasing demand. And this is where the pain becomes super visible, because now your supply chain teams feel like they're just constantly playing catch-up. You hear the complaints on the ground. Our inventory is in all the wrong places. But what's really broken is that the very first allocation was just a guess. And when that first domino falls incorrectly, every single decision that comes after it, replenishment, store transfers, you name it, becomes a reaction. It's just an expensive game of cleaning up yesterday's mess. And it creates this awful, vicious cycle. You have misplaced inventory, which leads to reactive decisions. Those knee-jerk decisions then distort the real demand signal even more, which forces your teams to intervene manually again. It's just this huge snowball of cost and waste all rolling downhill from that one bad forecast at the top. Which brings us to our third and final symptom. And this is where even the shiniest, most expensive technology can't help you. Retailers spend a fortune on fancy pricing tools, but the results are just meh. So why is that? And here it is. This is the uncomfortable truth of the matter. All those powerful pricing and promotion tools, they're built on one huge assumption, that you're feeding them a good, clean signal of what demand actually looks like. If you give them garbage in, they can't give you gold out. So of course your promotions are going to underperform. You can't maximize a sales lift if you don't really know what the baseline is. You can't measure those tricky things like halo effects or cannibalization. And your markdown decisions, they stop being strategic and just become a panicked way to get rid of stuff. The whole thing just turns back into guesswork. Okay, so we've looked at the evidence. Planning feels like guessing, allocation is always a step behind, and promotions are just not working. So it's time for the big reveal. Let's make the diagnosis.
You might look at all this and think, yeah, of course. It looks like a planning problem, it feels like an inventory problem, and it definitely seems like a pricing problem. But are any of those the real disease?
The answer, maybe surprisingly, is no. All of those things are real and painful, but they are just the symptoms, not the actual illness.
This is the root cause. All of that frustration, all of that wasted money, all of that friction between departments, it all grows from the same root: an unreliable, untrustworthy demand forecast. Okay, so if we finally know the real cause, it means we can stop wasting our time fighting the symptoms. We can focus on the cure. And honestly, that changes everything. I mean, just imagine for a second what happens when the forecast is actually right. Your planning isn't a guess anymore. It's laser focused on the customer. Allocation isn't a crapshoot, it's targeted. Replenishment suddenly becomes proactive instead of reactive, and promotions and markdowns, they become powerful strategic levers you can pull to shape demand and actually protect your margins. It really boils down to this. It's as simple and as difficult as this one idea. When you finally treat the disease, the bad forecast, all of those painful symptoms just start to fade away on their own. So, this is the real question. This is the one you need to take back to your teams. Forget asking why a promotion failed. Start asking this: do we as a company truly trust the demand forecast that's supposed to be the bedrock for all of our biggest decisions? At the end of the day, the way forward isn't to buy yet another tool to put a band-aid on a symptom. It's about making a fundamental shift in how your entire organization thinks about, predicts, and then acts on what your customers want. That is the real key to building a predictable business in a totally unpredictable world.